Randy, I can't believe it has been 13 and a half years since you went through podcasting A to Z. How are
Oh
you?
my gosh, man, I am great. I am great. I cannot believe it has been that long. I mean, I've got kids that age. So, yeah.
Oh my
Wow,
gosh.
that's awesome.
If I'm not mistaken, I think you have produced nearly or just over 600 episodes in the past 13 and a half years. Am I right?
More than that, actually.
Oh,
Yeah.
tell me more.
More by I would say about almost 2,500 as of last count.
Oh, whoa.
So
Dude,
yeah,
you've
yeah,
been
yeah.
busy.
Yeah. I have been busy, and you were certainly one of the primary sources of inspiration for that busyness, and just the friendship and education around podcasting certainly was born from those early days of listening to the podcast Answer Man podcast, and that really kind of took me on this this trajectory that I was on and have been on. And honestly, it didn't take off until about maybe 11 years ago was when I really took hold. But I always tell people I've been podcasting since 2009 because that was the first time that I physically created a podcast. And that was all because of your inspiration.
Nice. Well, I would love to hear about. Well, first of all, when did you first discover podcasting and what made you decide podcasting was for you?
I would have. I think I discovered podcasting fairly early on. I mean, I can remember when former President George Bush was putting out his weekly message via podcast. I think he was the first president to do so. And of course, I grew up in the '80s, so I followed Adam Curry for a long time, and so I kind of knew about it. But honestly, it wasn't until I heard you talking about your path with podcasting and your love of the lost episodes and how you built a community just around talking about that particular show, and that's when it really clicked for me, the power of podcasting. And then I think the next step for me was I was part of a church and they wanted to put their church sermons out as a podcast, so I helped them do that, and that really is where things kind of solidified for me.
So, when you took podcasting A to Z, had you already helped the church launch a podcast so you were familiar with some of the technology? What's the
I
timeline there?
So no, actually, I took podcasting A to Z after the fact. I had kind of figured some things out on my own. I kind of cobbled things together, and I guess, like a lot of people, I was like, "Oh, I can kind of figure this out on my own," which I did. I mean, I'm pretty well versed in things, but you really crystallized the whole concept of audio production, and more importantly, creating a narrative and telling a story around your podcast. And so that was really helpful for me because I always got more than just technical knowledge from you. I also got just the sensibility of how you craft a story to share. And I literally used a lot of your early episodes of that podcast you did about Lost as kind of an example of that. And that again, like I said, it's served as inspiration for me, and it's why I've always stayed in contact with you. And just outside of the fact that you're just a great guy, but I kind of got into podcasting A to Z backwards, whereas I already started some podcasting, but I knew I needed some help and guidance just to make sure that I was doing things the right way.
I love that. So, when you were helping your church set up their sermons, that was your first foray into the RSS feed creation and putting content out into the world, or and
Yes,
then
it
how long before
was.
you decided to do your own show?
Man, so the first show was the Randy Wilburn show, which right, everybody kind of does a show naming it after themselves, and I took a little bit of a little inspiration from you, but I would say in '09 I started doing the podcast for the church. That rolled out. I got the RSS feed set up. I went through Libsyn, which was at the time the company that you were recommending. And I honestly was with Libsyn for more than a decade, which is
Wow.
crazy when you think about it. But yeah, I set all that up with them. And then I would say maybe 2 years later, 2011, I did my own podcast, The Randy Wilburn Show. And then things kind of ebbed, right? And I just slowed down and I didn't really do anything, but I kept attending podcasting events. I would go to programs like New Media Expo and some of these other programs that were happening kind of at the early stages of when podcasting was just starting to grow, really take hold, I should say. And then it wasn't until 2015 that I came back to work with a company I used to be an owner of. And one of the first things I said to them was, we need to create a podcast for this company to tell the story of the brand.
Mm.
And they were like, oh, that's a great idea. You know, it was still kind of novel at that time and they didn't know what they were getting themselves into. But lo and behold, that podcast is still running to this day. And I have been doing that podcast for almost 10 years. And so I've had and I've had the pleasure of helping other brands and individuals get their podcast off the ground, but nowhere near the amount of people that you've touched and connected with through Podcast Answer Man. But again, you've always served as inspiration for me in terms of helping people out. And the thing that I really appreciated about you was that you helped out with a lot of things with not just me, but with other people that I know in our network, even before they would sign up for podcasting A to Z. So, you know, that's why I always hung with you and followed up with you because you know, I just saw you as a regular guy like myself and I identified with you and it always helped me through the podcasting process. And I always tell people about Cliff Ravenscraft, who were, you know, I always get the question now, who was your inspiration? And you certainly were, I would say, the first person that I looked at like myself and said, yeah, if he can do it, I should be able to do it. Not that there's a, you know what I'm saying? I mean,
Oh no,
it's
I
just
understand. Yeah.
no, yeah, so yeah. But I mean, I just said, hey,
If
yeah,
this
why
guy can
not?
do it,
And
why not? No, I get it.
no, no,
No,
no,
no, no.
no.
I get it. I love it. And I appreciate that. And by the way, thank you so much. I was doing some research before our conversation today and saw a I think a 2009 or 2012 blog post on smart passive income from our mutual friend Pat Flynn. And
Yes,
it was a
yes.
long entry about you and your journey and even there you gave some very glowing words about our experience in the early days together. So I appreciate that.
Hmm.
I want to
Yeah, and you introduced me to Pat too. So yeah, I mean, it was just, you know, great minds. So
Well, I want to go back to the Randy Wilburn podcast, that show, that first solo show of yours. What was what was the inspiration for that? I mean, like what is it that you wanted to accomplish with that show and who was the target audience and what was the message?
you know, I think at the time that I created that show, I had just turned 40 or I was close to it. Not quite. A little bit, maybe a year or two after I turned 40. So I was kind of dealing with a little bit of a midlife crisis. And they were like really honestly, I called it the musings of Randy Wilburn. And I wanted to identify people that were like me, that were maybe going through some of the same questions about life and just you know, whether or not you had done all that you could do. And it was just helpful, honestly. It was more therapeutic than anything else because it just helped me share some stories and think about, you know, the type of message that I would want to share with a larger audience. And I mean, I wish honestly I had continued out with that podcast, but I found it hard to talk about myself. I found it much easier to talk about other individuals or organizations. And that's why I think I've always gravitated towards storytelling around brands and around people that support those brands.
So, this early show kind of documenting your experiences, what was the reception like? How many people were you reaching with that and how many episodes did you do?
Man, not a lot. I may have done maybe 20 episodes. And I don't know that I ever had a ton of listeners. And just to be quite frank with you, it was at the early stages where I thought the numbers were everything. And then as I got on and as I grew as a podcaster, I recognized that, you're not going to change the world with the podcast, but you can change an individual. And when I started looking at it from that perspective, it took on a different focus for me. And so yeah, I never got it hardcore into the numbers, but I don't think I ever had more than, I don't know, 150, 200 downloads per episode
Well,
with that
that well,
podcast.
first of all, that's huge. Congratulations on a show called The Randy Wilburn Show, where
Right.
prior to that, it's not like you had this massive pent up demand on, oh my gosh, I wonder what's going on with Randy and his midlife crisis kind of questions of existence in this world. So the fact
Right.
that you had 150 people is huge. If you think about the last time, I know you've been on stages before. So think about the last time you stood on a stage in front of a group of 150 people. You got that picture in your
Oh.
mind?
Oh yeah, I do. I do.
Just imagine every time you published an episode of the Randy Wilburn show, that audience showed up to listen.
Right.
That's
Yeah. No,
huge.
it trust me. And you have been mentioning that, and I mention that all the time now to people, because a lot of times people get into these vanity metrics and why it's important to hit these certain numbers. And I try to explain to people that the podcast that I currently have, I get quite, I mean, I it's a weekly podcast, and I get a couple thousand people that download it each week, which I'm really impressed with for the local area, because it's a niche podcast. But I have to constantly remind myself that would be like me being in a small arena with a couple thousand people in it every time I held a mic in my hand. And that's what's really impressive for me.
Yeah.
And that more than anything else moves the needle for me, because again, I'm not selling out stadiums, and I'm not gonna have 80,000 people listening to me at one time. But even 500, even 250, like you said, 150, that makes a huge difference. And I try to explain that to brands all the time when I'm working with businesses, because they're always like, well, what are our numbers and what are our metrics? And I'm like, listen, you only need like 100 of the right people to be listening to your podcast at any one time, and it could be the difference in the type of business that you're doing.
I love that. There are two lines of thought that are going through my mind right now. I'll see if I can incorporate both of them. The first one I want to come back to is a quote that you said just a moment ago. I'm not going to change the world through a podcast, but I can change the life of one person. And I totally am in alignment with the essence of what you're saying there, but I would just say that my own mind is saying, but wait a second, if I change the life of one person, the butterfly effect or the ripple effect, the wave going out for generations, and the people that one person interacts with, that in itself changes the world. And so therefore, even if I only change the life of one person who listens to my podcast has changed the world.
Yeah, no, I sell myself short all the time from that perspective, and you're absolutely right. And it's actually, I think it is a healthy reminder that we should all have about that like you impact one person, and that one person can change the world. And in the process, you are also a factor in changing that world too.
Well, yes, absolutely. And that's the valuable lesson I think that people should know about podcasting. You may have only ever produced 20 or so episodes of the Randy Wilburn show. And the Randy Wilburn show may have had an average download numbers between 100 to 150 downloads per episode. But imagine 20 messages from your heart, from your soul to those people. That's had impact, and it's had
Yeah.
lasting impact. And you don't have to
Yeah.
go back and add more episodes to make it even more impactful. And then the second thing, and I will bring it back to the other thing that you said, it reminds me in 2008, Kevin Kelly wrote an article that you don't have to have a million followers to make a great living. You could actually have a wonderful high level career with only 1,000 true fans. And
Yeah.
then we've talked about over the years, it's like you don't even need 1,000. If you had 100 true fans, the way he defines true fans, that those people who love what you do so much that they'll buy every product and service you release into the world. That's what he defined as a true fan. 100 of those people could give you an incredible living. And then I got to thinking about it. Uh, when I think about the fact that Dan Miller, Michael Hyatt, Pat Flynn, and a handful of other people, there were four or five people who listened to Podcast Answer Man every single week. And those people were out there taking what they heard me say, blogging about the things that I said, giving me credit by name, doing podcast episodes about what I said, giving me credit by name, speaking on stages to people, giving me credit by name, and every single time recommending that they go listen to my podcast. So 4 or 5 people put me in front of hundreds of thousands of people. And so
Yeah.
you just never know who, and so whenever somebody says, "Oh man, nobody really downloads my show. It's only about 100, 150." And like, hey, that's amazing, dude. It's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah, that is funny. That's funny. And you're absolutely right. And I've heard people mention your name over and over again, even as recently as I think the last podcast movement I was, when people were talking about who was their source of inspiration. And again, and I'm still doing it to this day, and it's 2025, about to be 2026. So we're talking, I first interacted with you in '09, and so we're talking a long time. So because again, I consider my interactions with you even before we met by me just listening to your podcast.
Yeah. Okay. So the Randy Wilburn show, and then you said, was the next show after that? Was it the show that you convinced the company to start, the company that you used to own?
Yeah, yeah. So I used to be an owner of a company called Zwei Group. It's a management consulting firm that serves the design industry. So think engineers and architects. It's still in existence. It's actually based here in Fayetteville, Arkansas, where I live. It used to be based in Boston, Massachusetts, where I used to live. And long story short, when I moved here to Fayetteville to come back to work at the company, one of the first things I did was get them to start a podcast, which we still do to this day. So it's been almost 10 years, several hundred episodes, and we just it's a branded podcast that tells the story of individuals that work in this industry. And we also talk about the brand of Zwei Group as well. So it's just been a super successful platform. And from that, I have gone on and helped many design firms start their own branded podcast to tell stories about their design abilities, or just tell stories in general about why they do what they do. Because, like I said, people, they don't care what you know until they know until people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Yeah.
And I always tell people that you can gain understanding and you can build a community by showing that you care. And one way to show them that you care is to tell your story early and often. And so I have convinced brands that aren't typically, and I'm using air quotes now, used to telling their story, by talking about themselves in a way that, not is not only edifying for them, but is also helpful to the general public to understand why they should even do business with this company in the first place.
I love that. And what is the format of that show? Does it change from time to time? Is it solo hosted, interview only format? What goes on in that kind of show?
Yeah, it's primarily been an interview show. I have done some solo monologues on that show. Originally, now this is the funny part. When I started the show, all I wanted to do was use it as a nexus to build the following of this company's newsletter, which is a newsletter that's run since 1992. It's well established in this community, but at the time that I came back to the company, it was not as big as it used to be, the newsletter itself. So we use the podcast as kind of an entree into the newsletter. That's why the podcast is called the Zweig Letter Podcast. And so it has been a kind of a way to get people to introduce them to Zweig Group, introduce them to the newsletter. So and it's a free newsletter now. It used to be well, it's a long story, but it's a free newsletter now, and so a lot of people sign up for the newsletter through the podcast, and it's kind of like a leader into just the world of Zweig Group. And so I originally had the founder of the company read his articles on the podcast, and we would talk about them a little bit. Then we started talking about some of the different articles that he had written each week in the newsletter. We would talk about that on the podcast. Then I started interviewing different people that we had done business with or that were doing interesting things in the design industry space. So I found a multitude of ways to tell stories on that podcast. And it essentially started out literally having him read, like you can go back and they're still there, but you can hear him read articles that he had written in the Zweig Letter newsletter. And so that's where we started. And it took on a life of its own. And as a matter of fact, the last episode that was released was an episode that I did with Mark, but it was more of a interview format where we were just talking about some things happening in the industry and some things that we have had experienced. And then the other cool thing about this podcast is because it also opened up the doors for us to talk to a number of thought leaders in the design industry space. So I have been privileged to interview some really like world renowned, highly regarded and respected architects and engineers, two of whom have passed away that I had on the podcast that, people listen to those episodes all the time because those individuals are still loom large in the design industry space, even though they've passed on. So that's why I tell people all the time, you just never know, that when you record something like this, that it's going to have staying power beyond anything you could probably imagine.
Yeah, I love that. It reminds me of one of the benefits that I don't hear talked about a whole lot in the space today, and that is that you could launch a podcast for no other reason than to build your professional network.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it is amazing the number of people who will give you an hour of their week to have a conversation where you could ask them an unlimited number of questions during that hour, and they will
Yeah.
gladly do that because it gives them that exposure to talk about themselves, to tell their story, to share their journey, to share their wisdom, to pay it forward, and all of that stuff. And many times, I would say that 98% of the time, if you were to simply ask them for an hour of their time, let me buy you lunch, let me buy you dinner, let's jump on a phone call, the answer would be no. But all you have to do is
Absolutely.
is, is re- offer to record the conversation and put it in a podcast, and now all of a sudden you've got this access to these people, and that's not a benefit that's really talked a lot about today.
Can I just add one piece to that is that something that I recognized early on was just what you said. Nobody has the time to just sit down and talk with you over coffee or whatever. I have like literally never been told no when it comes to asking for an interview. Everybody. And I messed around and I actually put together a what I would like to think is a pretty good podcast, became well known in that state, the design industry space. And so people looked at it as a badge of honor to be on the podcast. So whenever the company, I would say to the company, if you guys get turned down for work to work with a specific company for one reason or another, let me speak to those individuals and invite them on the podcast. And a lot of times we would invite people on the podcast that the company wanted to do business with, and they got business because of the podcast in that way, right? Because again, we shared our platform with this individual who has something to share. And here's the dirty little secret. We all have something to share.
Yeah.
So I mean, anybody that says, oh, well, I don't have time for that. Listen, everybody that's out there breathing and doing something in the world, whether for a business, whether it's for profit, nonprofit, it doesn't matter. We all have a story to share. And if you have even a remotely decent platform to share it on, then that opens up a lot of doors that you wouldn't normally have open.
Yes, I love that message. Thank you for sharing it.
Yeah,
Randy,
absolutely.
what happened next? I mean, obviously, we've got up on the lower thirds here for anybody who's watching on video as we record this conversation. I am northwestarkansas.com.
Yes.
Is that the
Yes.
next foray into podcasting?
Yes, so I left the company's Y Group. I still consult with them and I still do a podcast with them. So I left them in 2019, pre-pandemic, and decided I wanted to step out on my own and be an entrepreneur again. And I honestly, Cliff, the reason why I started the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, because it is a true niche podcast for Northwest Arkansas. I don't do it for anybody in any other part of the country unless you're planning to move or relocate here. Then the podcast could be for you because it would give you information and insight into what makes this place so special. And for those that are, maybe geographically challenged, or I'm in Northwest Arkansas, so I'm near Bentonville, and Bentonville happens to be the home headquarters of Walmart. It's just a small little mom and pop shop that's that's all over the place. And so because of that, Walmart has attracted everything here. I physically live in Fayetteville, and there are four cities in this area. Fayetteville happens to also be the home for the University of Arkansas. So the Razorbacks are here. So this is an SEC college town. And when I moved here in 2014, there was no podcast that could tell me what I was getting myself into. And I remember landing at the airport at XNA Airport and looking around. And when I landed, when the plane landed back in the day in 2014, to your right, you would see cow pastures. And I was like, well, what am I getting myself into? Here I am, a city boy coming from Boston, and I'm coming to this place, and I just didn't know. And so it worked out. I mean, it was a good bet on a place that's growing, one of the fastest growing areas in the country. But in 2019, I tell people all the time, I created the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast because it's the podcast I would have wanted when I moved here, but it didn't exist. So 5 years later, I created it. And man, I can't even, we don't even have enough time for me to tell you how much of a life changer and a game changer that podcast was, because I took the skill sets that I had as a podcaster with Zwei Group and what I had built up over time. Because you've always talked about, you got to just get in and press record. You always talked about that, and that was the thing that I took away from my experiences with you, is that you were just consistent, and that consistency pays off over time. And for me, I just got really consistent with this podcast for I Am Northwest Arkansas. It comes out every week. I have never missed a Monday in 6 years. This particular podcast, I've done about, I want to say about 450 episodes of this podcast, but it has been a blessing to me beyond compare. And it has opened doors. I've worked with the Walton Family Foundation. I've worked with an organization called the Northwest Arkansas Council, which was an organization that actually Sam Walton started before he passed away to help advance this area. But I've just been given so many opportunities because of this podcast, and it has opened doors. And, I am a little bit of a local celebrity here because of the podcast. But again, I'm a big fish in a small pond. And Northwest Arkansas, it's only about 600,000 people, to give you an idea of the number of people here. So we're not talking millions, but
Mhm.
my podcast has reached hundreds of thousands of people in the last 6 years and has really made a difference, for both local for profit and nonprofit businesses, individuals that are wanted to share their story, and people that are just making a difference in our community.
I love that. You are among probably 10 or 15 students who went through podcasting A to Z, who either started with or ultimately ended up doing a podcast devoted to a geographic region. And
Mhm.
in every case, I hear the same level of excitement and enthusiasm as I'm picking up from you about this podcast. And by the way, there's one audience that you didn't mention that I'm sure you've probably heard from some folks. And that is, it's not just people who live in the area and who are thinking about moving to the area and want to learn about the area, but there may be a number of people who, because of aging parents or military displacement, they may have gone and had to move somewhere else, but they listen to the show because they like to feel connected to what happens back at home.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And I actually have quite a few different avatars or archetype listeners for this podcast, and I have a huge group of folks. I have a large contingent of listeners in India because we have a large Indian population here that work at Walmart and other places. I have, for some reason, I have the UK. I've got folks that listen to it, and I did talk to a few people because I've done some demographic studies from my podcast, and I have talked to some people that don't live here anymore that listen to the podcast on a regular basis, like every week. And I'm like, wow, and it's amazing. And some of these people have just said, "Oh, I just like listening to your podcast. I just like the variety of people that you bring on," and that's been kind of it. And the nice thing about creating a niche podcast is you can do a lot of different things with it. I know people that have created podcasts here that focus exclusively on the music scene, people that have created podcasts here that focus exclusively on the food scene. And then, I've always kind of, I have four buckets, and it's business, culture, entrepreneurship, and life here in the Ozarks, which technically could be anything. But that's been my focus, and that's how I've always, sold this podcast and why I think it's valuable. And I've had a lot of leaders come here to work for Walmart or Tyson Foods, which is here as well, or JB Hunt, which is the largest logistics company in the world. I've had a number of different companies, number of different professionals come here, and they said that my podcast was what put them over the top and convincing them to move them and their family here to Northwest Arkansas.
That's amazing. I mean, if you think about that, that is probably one of the top 3 life decisions a person can make. And
Yeah.
you and your podcast is a major deciding factor of whether or not to make that life choice. I think that's awesome.
Yeah, yeah. Listen, I keep having, I always have that Uncle Ben quote in my head: "To whom much power is given, much is expected." Right? And I know I'm not Spider-Man or Peter Parker, but I always feel that way when it comes to my podcast, and that I have a responsibility, to tell good stories, to share good stories, and to just be transparent with people about what this area is like. And I have found that people really resonate with just being your true authentic self in that process, and I am never going to stray from that.
So, you mentioned the 2 shows, the one you did with your former company and this show for I Am Northwest Arkansas.
Right.
Are these audio only podcasts, or do they have a
So
YouTube variant as well?
So the YouTube variant that I have for I Am Northwest Arkansas is primarily audio only. So I use the YouTube process to upload the audio portion of my podcast to YouTube. There are episodes that I will record similar to the way that we're recording this through Zoom, where I will share both the video and the audio. And so, like, for instance, the one that I just shared this past week of Christmas at the time that we're recording this of 2025, I actually happened to put out the video. I have had episodes where I have done video first, but I am an audio purist, kind of like you are for the most part. But and I know you've done a lot of video too. But I'm an audio purist, and I just prefer. I mean, here's the thing, and this is what I tell people all the time: I can't walk the dog and watch a video. I can barely do the dishes and watch a video. I sometimes prop my phone up on the
I
windowsill,
I'm
but it
always
always
afraid
falls
I'm
down.
always
It
afraid it's
always
gonna
falls
fall in the
down.
sink.
So no, it always does fall down. And so I mean, there's just certain things I can't do with video, and that's why. And what I'm reminded of is how powerful it is when you put those headphones in your ear and you're listening to somebody tell a story or share some information. I mean, that's just so powerful. And I just think honestly that we're a little bit more present when we are listening than when we add the video component to it. That's just my unscientific view of it, but I know that there is some science that actually bears that out as well.
Yeah.
Because I will listen to certain podcasts and listen to them, but then watch the video of it as well down the road, and I retain way more when I'm listening just to the audio as opposed to the audio and the video.
Yeah, but you and I are much aligned on that way of viewing it. I am attempting, now that I've unretired the Podcast Answer Man brand, and I know a lot of people are heavily influenced by the celebrity podcasters in the space, and they're wanting to turn their spare bedroom into a $50,000 video production studio. And I'm like, listen,
Yeah.
I will help you achieve whatever it is you're setting out to do. And so I am trying to keep an open mind. There definitely are some perks to the algorithm and discoverability, but uh, I think the people who benefit most from that are people who have already discovered their voice behind a camera or a microphone already. Their communication is on point, their messaging is on point, and these people aren't shy. They already have a pretty decent following. Those people, I think, could probably, and if they have the financial means to do so, I think there's so much. Why not hire a team of anywhere between 2 to 8 people to manage the video side of your podcast, and that
Right.
might be a good fit for you. But outside of all of that, there is certainly a lot of value to either an audio first or audio only podcast production today.
100%. I mean, and I mean, there's some great programs out there now called Ecamm Live and some others that really allow you. I mean, those are things that are out now that those just didn't exist when I first connected with you, right? And
Yeah.
it was, listen, I mean, we were talking about Audacity, we were talking about doing things. Everything was just like, and then GarageBand, and I mean, it was all. I mean, and that was the thing. I mean, I think that's the one benefit that I have and you have, of course, and so many others that started podcasts a long time ago, is we got to cut our teeth when nobody had the bells and whistles that exist today. I mean, what I'm able to do, I use a program called Descript, and this is not a disclaimer or a commercial for them, but what Descript allows me to do now from an editing perspective, even though, and I'm putting this out there, I have a personal editor that I have worked with for almost 9 years now, and so I rarely edit most of my stuff, but when I do, I use Descript and I use Hindenburg, but I mean what the capabilities are today
Yeah.
versus what they were back in '09, 2010, 2011, it's like night and day. I mean, it's just nowadays there's really no excuse for somebody not to be able to rip off a podcast, and what I mean by rip it off, but record one and then, get it, edit it lightly and make it ready for general consumption. And you don't need a lot of bells and whistles to do that, but the technology is such that you have that capability, and it's actually a lot easier than it was when I first got into the industry.
Yeah, there's that is absolutely even just audio without the video side, the cost of equipment. I was just talking about the PodTrack P4 Next recently from
Yeah, I
Zoom.
saw you using that. I wanted to ask you about that because I'm thinking about getting one. I've used a Zoom H6. I have three of them, and I still use the Audio Technica ATR 2100 that you recommended a long time ago. I think I've just stuck with Audio Technica because they've always been reliable. And the other thing that I love about Audio Technica is they stand behind their products. It's they, I have sent several mics that stopped working back to them, and they would send me a new mic, and I'm just like, I was like, how come you guys don't advertise this? And they're like, well, we just stand behind our product. And I really appreciate them. To the point where I know the woman in the returns department there really well. But anybody that asks me what mic should I get, I always tell them an ATR 2100. It's a USB mic that has XLR inputs, but I mean, it's a great starting mic, and I think it does a really good job without somebody spending a lot of money to get started in the recording space for podcasting.
Yeah, that was a very good mic for sure. I don't think they make it anymore though. So
Yeah, they make some variation of it, but I actually have it, and that's what I'm recording with right now. But like I said, nobody gives me a hard time about how I sound or anything like that. So
yeah. Well, Randy, let me ask you that what would you say is you said we can't go for the next 5 days to talk about how all of the amazing things that have happened in your life. Name what you would think are the top 1 or 2 things that have happened as a result of podcasting in your life.
man, I think there have been a couple of episodes that I have done that have literally been life-changing for people, and I think I'm very appreciative of that aspect of it. I've had a few people that I met and that had heard about the podcast even before they physically met me, and we've become friends. And it has opened up doors. It's so much easier to talk to people because of this podcast. And the cool thing that I always have to pinch myself with is that I'll be out sometimes and people will hear my voice and they're like, you're not the I Am Northwest Arkansas podcast, are you? And, I'm like, well, why, yes, I am. And so it's always nice to be able to share, have those stories. But, it's just been a blessing to be able to do this. And I think for me, one of the biggest things was, understanding the power of your voice and understanding the power that we have now. Like, and I think I've shared this before on my podcast, and I think I've told you this, but my grandfather was the first African American broadcaster with ABC News back in 1962, and he was an amazing journalist. And he was a mentor to Ted Koppel and Peter Jennings and so many other you know uh, you know journalism greats, broadcasting greats. But I could only imagine what my grandfather would have been able to do with this microphone and the capabilities that you and I have at our disposal today. With his storytelling ability, I mean, it would have been game on, and it would have been, so I just feel like I'm on some really big shoulders, and I've been given an opportunity to continue that vein of storytelling that my grandfather started so many years ago, and do it in a new way where I bring a lot of the sensibilities that he brought to the news stories that he covered, whether it was Malcolm X or Martin Luther King or the Poor People's March or the March on Washington or the death of Robert F. Kennedy. I mean, the list goes on and on and on. When I think of what he was able to do, but he was doing it with the backing of ABC News, and I literally have a Zoom H6 digital recorder and a microphone and some cables and a headset, and I can go to town and have a similar impact. That has always sat with me, and I don't take it for granted. And I'm very, very thankful for the opportunity that podcasting has given me. And I think that that opportunity is there for a number of people to take advantage of, because, as I always say, we all have a story to tell. It's just whether you choose to tell it or not. And I think podcasting is a great way for people to get behind that mic, be comfortable with pressing record and telling their story.
I love that. So, speaking of those people, I just published episode 478 of Podcast Answer Man today,
That's
dispelling some
crazy.
of the myths of the easy podcast success that's given by celebrity podcasters.
Yeah.
And so far, three people have already commented since this morning. They said, Cliff, wow, your post here on Facebook, just about what you've shared about what you talk about in this episode, it's already described completely three of the main reasons why I've wanted to launch a podcast for years, but never have. I can't wait to listen
Yeah.
to your show. And some of the
Yeah.
most common reasons people have decided not to launch a podcast is because, number one, it feels like it's too overwhelming. Number two, who wants to listen to what I have to say? There are so many other people out there with a podcast. It seems like nobody will ever follow me. And another one is, gosh, before I was almost ready to launch a podcast, but now I'm told that I'm not even going to be taken seriously if I don't have video and I don't create a YouTube channel and put cameras on me and multi cameras and have high production values. And these people are ready to just give up on their dream of having a podcast. So, Randy, for those who are dreaming and have been dreaming for months, if not for years, of launching a podcast, and in their mind, they would like to do an audio podcast starting in 2026. What would you say to them?
I would say 100% be comfortable telling your story in front of a mic, even without the camera. To me, the camera is extra. And again, I get it that, we're looking at vanity metrics now, right? Which is what a lot of people are thinking about. It's like, oh, if I do a video, then it just gives me a bigger audience to go to. And there is some truth to that. But I still think that there are still enough people that listen to audio first podcasts, that will listen to what you have to share. If it's of quality, people are going to listen to it. I listen to Diary of a CEO all the time. I very rarely watch the video. I always
Mhm.
listen to the audio. I listen to the Founders podcast. I've never seen a video of his. Everything has been audio, and so you have a story to tell. You should tell that story. Don't be afraid to press record and get that story out there, because what you're going to find is, as I tell people all the time, video is a heavier lift, especially when it comes to editing and all of that. And if you are just trying to get the ball rolling, audio is the way to go, because there will be people that will listen. You will get feedback. You will get responses of what works, what doesn't work, and you can continue to fine tune that before you go off the deep end trying to satisfy, the urge or the need that you think the public has for you to do something from a video standpoint. And even I've been in this for a long time, not quite as long as Cliff, but I've been in this space for a long time. I have even had to reconcile myself to that effect and remind myself that it's not always it's about the storytelling more than anything else, and the information that you're sharing. And trust me when I say this, if you're putting out quality information and you put it out there in the normal channels, people will find it and people will share it. And that's the one thing that I have really rested on, is that people have shared my podcast, and I Am Northwest Arkansas is an audio first podcast. So there are others that have come along since I started. I was the first in this area to do a podcast in the way that I do it, and I have stuck true to the audio first aspect. There are other video podcasts out there that talk about this. Some have come and gone. I still put out an episode every Monday, rain or shine. And it's just something that I'm very passionate about. And I think when you find that lane, you need to ride that lane as long as you can. And so don't feel like you have to go video because you're going to miss out on a portion of a certain audience that didn't exist to begin with, right? Because the idea is that you're going to start, everybody starts from the same, right? You're going to start, some people are going to find, you're going to have early adopters, you're going to have family and friends, and then other people. And then as you start to put content out that people like, they're going to start gravitating towards it. They're going to start sharing it. And that's when things will build up. But I'm saying that you can do all of that with audio. You don't necessarily need video in order to build that momentum. It doesn't work that way. I know the young kids like to watch a lot of videos, but even my kids listen to a lot of podcasts. So you'd be surprised. And I have a huge demographic, a huge following of college age kids that listen to my podcast all the time. And actually I've had a lot of them tell me, it's just I don't want everything to be video, video, video. And sometimes I just like to listen to audio, and that helps calm me a little bit, as opposed to me having to scroll through and look at a bunch of videos all the time.
Randy, thank you so much. It has been a delight to call you a friend for these 13 and a half years. And I know that the relationship was formed a little bit earlier than when we first started working together through the content that I was creating. But man, you have been a blessing consistently, yes, in my life
Yes.
over more than a decade. And I always
Yes.
appreciate you. I'm thrilled when I put the call out. Hey, who went through podcasting A to Z. I want to know who here's still podcasting today, and it was so fun to hear from you and to
Oh
kind of
yeah.
get a
Yeah.
behind the scenes look into the journey that you've got going on. Is there
Oh.
anything that I didn't ask you that you would want to say? Anything you want to share before we wrap up?
I mean, we've covered quite a bit, and this has really been a treat for us to be able to do this. I just think that I think more and more people need to recognize that their story does matter, right? And I know I say that over and over again, but I just have to keep repeating it. Your story does matter, and people want to hear what you have to say. As a matter of fact, I go so far as to say that there are people in the world that are waiting with
Mm.
eager expectation for the stories that are going to come out of your mouth, but you just haven't told them yet. And so, my encouragement to you is to utilize a lot of what Cliff is talking about, utilize his teachings, and just get a better understanding of the practice of podcasting, and determine how you can incorporate that into your life so that you can do it as effortlessly as possible. And that's the thing. I have tried to make podcasting as frictionless as possible over the years so that it's super easy. And that's one of the things that Cliff taught me a long time ago, was just setting your place up properly, having the right equipment, having the right tools necessary. But the bottom line is that nowadays, and it was the same before, but even more so nowadays, there is no excuse, because most of us are carrying around these supercomputers in our pocket. And even if you have to start there with a simple connected microphone or lav that you just talk into and you record something, you want to get in the habit of recording it and putting it out there, because you never know who's listening. And again, like we said earlier, that butterfly effect is a real thing. And you change one person's life, it can go on to have a profound effect, and how many other lives are changed in that process because of your faithfulness to just getting started and getting your message out there for the world to hear.
I love that. Great message, Randy Wilburn. Thank you so much. I am northwestarkansas.com if you want to check out his podcast. And of course, if you would like to have me as your personal coach, walking you through every single step in the process of launching your podcast over 4 weeks, or if you already have a podcast like Randy did when he joined Podcasting A to Z, and you'd like to have unlimited access to me as your personal coach for 4 weeks to talk about how to take your message, your business, and your life to the next level, head over to podcastinga2z.com. Thank you all so much. And until next time, put your message out into the world. Thanks, Randy.
Peace. Thank you.